Avoidant behavior is rarely a simple preference for distance. It is usually the expression of a nervous system that once learned closeness could be overwhelming, unpredictable, or unsafe. In early experiences, emotional needs may have been dismissed, criticized, or inconsistently met. The child who reached outward and was met with confusion or intrusion gradually discovered that self-reliance felt safer than dependence. Over time, this strategy hardened into personality. What appears in adulthood as indifference or cold restraint is often an old survival pattern repeating itself with quiet loyalty. The avoidant individual does not wake each morning intending to withdraw. Rather, withdrawal has become the most reliable way they know to preserve stability. To understand this is not to excuse harmful behavior, but to recognize that behind distance lies adaptation, not malice. When we see avoidance through this lens, the dynamic shifts from accusation to comprehension, and comprehension becomes the first bridge toward change. At the center of avoidant behavior lies a profound fear of losing autonomy. Intimacy can feel like a slow erosion of identity, as though connection demands surrender of personal space, thoughts, and emotional boundaries. For someone shaped by early experiences of intrusion or emotional chaos, closeness is unconsciously equated with engulfment. Therefore, when another person intensifies pursuit, demands reassurance, or insists on constant emotional exchange, the avoidant nervous system interprets it as danger. The reaction is predictable. Distance increases, communication shortens, and emotional doors close. This is not because the avoidant individual lacks feeling. On the contrary, feelings may be strong, but they are carefully guarded. The more pressure applied from the outside, the more fiercely the inner world is protected. Understanding this dynamic prevents us from personalizing every withdrawal. It reveals a pattern driven less by rejection and more by self-preservation. There is also an internal conflict within the avoidant person that often goes unseen. A part of them longs for connection, warmth, and shared meaning, while another part remains vigilant, scanning for signs of dependency or loss of control. This creates a cycle of approach and retreat. They may draw near when the environment feels calm and non-demanding, only to step back when intensity rises. Observers sometimes misinterpret this inconsistency as manipulation, yet it is frequently the result of competing psychological forces. The desire to bond is genuine, but so is the fear of becoming trapped. When we recognize this duality, we begin to respond with steadiness rather than reaction. Stability, predictability, and respect for boundaries can gradually reduce the internal alarm. Change does not occur through force, but through repeated experiences of safety, and safety, offered consistently without pressure, is often the quiet beginning of transformation. When a person responds to distance with increased pursuit, the dynamic often intensifies rather than resolves. Emotional pressure, even when disguised as care or determination, can feel overwhelming to someone who already associates closeness with loss of control. Repeated demands for reassurance, constant questioning about feelings, or attempts to force immediate clarity may appear logical to the one seeking connection. Yet, to the avoidant individual, these behaviors register as intrusion. The nervous system shifts into protection mode. Communication becomes brief, physical presence decreases, and emotional sharing narrows. What the pursuer interprets as stubbornness is often a stress response. The more insistence they encounter, the more necessary withdrawal feels. This is not a conscious strategy to dominate the situation. It is an automatic effort to restore internal equilibrium. Without recognizing this pattern, both individuals become trapped in a loop where pursuit fuels retreat and retreat fuels further pursuit. Pressure does not only arise through overt confrontation. It can also manifest through subtle emotional signals such as disappointment, silent resentment, or exaggerated displays of self-sacrifice intended to provoke guilt. The avoidant personality is highly sensitive to expectations that imply obligation. When affection is intertwined with a demand to respond in a specific way, it feels conditional. Even well-intentioned attempts to discuss the future or define the relationship can trigger a sense of confinement if delivered with urgency. The avoidant mind begins to anticipate loss of freedom long before any real restriction exists. Consequently, distancing behaviors increase. They may immerse themselves in work, hobbies, or solitude to regain a sense of independence. What is often misunderstood is that the avoidant individual does not withdraw because they do not care. They withdraw because they feel cornered. Pressure amplifies the very fear it seeks to eliminate. Breaking this cycle requires restraint and self-awareness from the one who feels compelled to push forward. Instead of escalating emotional intensity, it becomes necessary to regulate one's own anxiety. When expectations soften and space is respected, the atmosphere shifts. The avoidant person begins to experience connection without immediate demand. Conversations can unfold at a manageable pace. Trust grows not through dramatic declarations, but through consistency and calm presence. When the environment feels voluntary rather than forced, defenses gradually lower. This does not mean ignoring one's own needs or accepting neglect. It means expressing needs clearly without attaching urgency or threat. Over time, the absence of pressure communicates a powerful message. Closeness does not equal captivity. In that realization, withdrawal loses its urgency and genuine engagement becomes more possible. Real influence does not arise from force, persuasion, or psychological maneuvering. It emerges from inner stability. When dealing with an avoidant individual, the instinct to gain leverage can be strong. One may believe that withholding affection, creating jealousy, or demonstrating exaggerated independence will compel the other person to return with greater intensity. Yet such tactics only reproduce insecurity on both sides. True influence begins when you no longer attempt to control the outcome. It is grounded in the discipline of regulating your own emotions rather than reacting to another's withdrawal. When you are able to remain composed in the face of distance, you communicate something powerful without words. Your identity does not depend on their immediate response. This steadiness disrupts the familiar pattern. The avoidant person, accustomed to being chased or confronted, encounters instead a presence that does not collapse or pursue. In that unexpected calm, curiosity replaces defense. Self-mastery requires confronting the discomfort that arises when connection feels uncertain. Instead of demanding reassurance, you learn to tolerate ambiguity. Instead of interpreting silence as rejection, you pause before forming conclusions. This does not mean suppressing your needs, but expressing them without emotional volatility. When your communication is clear, measured, and respectful, it becomes easier for the avoidant individual to listen without feeling attacked. Emotional self-regulation acts as a stabilizing force within the interaction. It reduces the intensity that often triggers retreat. Influence then becomes less about convincing and more about embodying reliability. The avoidant person may not respond immediately, but over time they register the difference. They notice that closeness with you does not produce chaos. They observe that disagreements do not escalate into threats. Gradually, their nervous system associates your presence with safety rather than pressure. The paradox is that the moment you release the desire to dominate, your impact deepens. Mastery over oneself is more compelling than mastery over another. When you cultivate independence, meaningful routines, and emotional resilience, you shift the relational balance. You are no longer negotiating from fear of abandonment. You are choosing connection rather than clinging to it. This shift reduces the unconscious power struggle that often defines interactions with avoidant personalities. Instead of trying to make them fall into submission, you create conditions where they may step forward willingly. Influence grounded in integrity invites participation rather than obedience. And participation, freely chosen, forms a stronger foundation than any outcome achieved through pressure. When we encounter avoidance in another person, we often focus entirely on their behavior, overlooking the possibility that something within us is also being revealed. The tendency to chase, to fix, or to break through someone's emotional distance can point toward our own hidden fears. Perhaps we fear abandonment more than we admit. Perhaps we equate love with intensity and feel uneasy when connection unfolds slowly. The avoidant individual becomes a mirror, reflecting our impatience, our need for reassurance, or our discomfort with uncertainty. This reflection is not comfortable. It challenges the image we hold of ourselves as calm and understanding. Yet within this discomfort lies an opportunity. Instead of attempting to reshape the other person, we can examine the impulses that arise within us. Why does their silence provoke anxiety? Why does their independence feel threatening? By turning inward with honesty rather than blame, we begin to see that avoidance is not only their pattern, it interacts with our own unexamined tendencies. The concept of the shadow refers to those aspects of ourselves we prefer not to acknowledge. In relationships, the shadow often appears in subtle forms, such as control disguised as care or urgency disguised as passion. When we insist that someone respond in a particular way, we may believe we are fighting for connection. Yet beneath that effort could lie a fear of not being chosen. The avoidant person's distance activates this fear, and our reaction becomes an attempt to silence it. If we do not recognize this process, we risk escalating the very dynamic we wish to resolve. The more we press forward, the more they retreat. The cycle continues because both individuals are defending against inner discomfort. Awareness interrupts this pattern. When we accept that part of our drive to pursue comes from insecurity, we gain the freedom to respond differently. Integration of the shadow does not mean suppressing desire for closeness. It means holding that desire with maturity. We can express needs clearly without demanding immediate fulfillment. We can value connection without abandoning our own stability. As we develop this balance, something shifts in the relational field. The avoidant individual senses less pressure because our approach is no longer fueled by hidden fear. Instead of two defensive systems colliding, there is space for gradual understanding. By facing our own vulnerabilities, we reduce the urgency that once dominated the interaction. In doing so, we discover that transformation begins not with altering the other, but with illuminating the parts of ourselves that once acted unconsciously. Patience is often misunderstood as passivity, yet in the presence of an avoidant individual, it becomes a deliberate and disciplined strength. When someone withdraws, the immediate impulse may be to close the gap as quickly as possible. However, patience allows space without surrendering dignity. It communicates confidence in the natural rhythm of connection. An avoidant person, conditioned to expect pressure after distance, is often unsettled by calm steadiness. When there is no dramatic reaction to their need for space, their defensive anticipation gradually softens. They begin to observe that separation does not automatically result in conflict or emotional punishment. This repeated experience reshapes expectation. Patience in this sense is not waiting helplessly. It is holding one's ground without aggression. It signals that closeness is available, but not forced. Over time, this quiet consistency can reduce the reflex to retreat because the environment feels less threatening and more predictable. Grounded presence deepens the effect of patience. Presence means being attentive and emotionally available when interaction occurs, rather than distant or resentful. It requires listening without immediately correcting, fixing, or analyzing. Avoidant individuals often guard their inner world carefully, revealing thoughts in measured portions. If those revelations are met with intense reaction or interrogation, the door closes quickly. A grounded response, however, acknowledges what is shared without amplifying it into something overwhelming. This balanced engagement creates a new relational pattern. The avoidant person learns that vulnerability will not be exploited or exaggerated. They experience dialogue that respects boundaries while still maintaining warmth. Such moments accumulate quietly. Each calm exchange becomes evidence that connection can exist without engulfment. In this atmosphere, trust forms gradually, not through dramatic gestures, but through consistent emotional reliability. The power of patience and presence lies in their subtlety. They do not demand transformation, they invite it. When an avoidant individual senses that their autonomy is intact and that closeness is voluntary, their internal resistance decreases. They may initiate contact more frequently or remain engaged longer in conversation. These changes often occur without grand declarations. They emerge from the steady assurance that space will be honored and emotions will be handled with care. This approach does not guarantee immediate intimacy, nor does it eliminate all distance, yet it creates conditions where defensiveness is less necessary. In choosing patience over pressure and presence over pursuit, you offer stability rather than struggle, and within stability, the guarded heart may slowly discover the courage to remain open. Authentic strength is often silent. It does not announce itself through dominance, nor does it attempt to command loyalty. In the presence of an avoidant individual, this kind of strength becomes especially significant. Many people believe that intensity, strategic distance, or emotional games will make them more desirable. Yet these tactics usually create instability, which reinforces the avoidant person's belief that closeness is unsafe. Authentic strength, by contrast, is rooted in self-respect and emotional balance. It is visible in the way someone maintains their routines, honors their commitments, and speaks calmly, even when uncertainty arises. This steadiness signals that connection is a choice, not a desperate necessity. The avoidant individual, who is often alert to signs of dependency or volatility, begins to recognize a different pattern. Instead of feeling pressured, they sense reliability. Instead of anticipating chaos, they encounter composure. This contrast can be quietly compelling. Attraction, in its healthiest form, is drawn towards stability. When you cultivate your own interests, friendships, and ambitions, you demonstrate that your identity is not consumed by the relationship. This does not create distance, it creates balance. Avoidant personalities are highly sensitive to any hint that they are becoming someone's sole emotional anchor. When they feel responsible for regulating another person's security, their instinct is to withdraw. However, when they see that you are grounded and fulfilled independently, their fear of being trapped diminishes. Your independence reassures them that closeness will not erase individuality. It becomes possible for them to approach without sensing a hidden obligation. Authentic strength therefore reduces defensive reactions because it does not demand constant reassurance. It stands firm without clinging, offering partnership rather than possession. Manipulation, on the other hand, is easily detected even when disguised as strategy. Sudden shifts in attention meant to provoke jealousy, calculated silence intended to regain control, or exaggerated displays of indifference create an atmosphere of mistrust. The avoidant person may respond temporarily, but the underlying insecurity remains. Authentic strength does not rely on such maneuvers. It is consistent across circumstances. It communicates openly about needs without ultimatums. Over time, this reliability fosters a sense of safety that no tactic can achieve. The avoidant individual may gradually lower defenses, not because they were cornered, but because they feel respected. In this way, true influence emerges naturally. It is not forced through pressure, but inspired by integrity. Integration of independence and intimacy is a delicate psychological task, particularly when relating to someone who values autonomy above all else. Many people unconsciously frame independence and closeness as opposing forces. They believe that to gain intimacy, one must sacrifice freedom, or to preserve freedom, one must restrict emotional depth. The avoidant individual often lives within this tension. They protect their autonomy carefully because they fear that intimacy will consume it. Yet healthy relationships are not built on erasure of self. They are formed through the meeting of two differentiated